nonprofit domestic violence and sexual assault service organization, serving Summit, Wasatch counties as a sexual assault service specialist. Her career in survivor services is relatively new. She worked as a guide at the YWCA Family Justice Center and a relief advocate at the YWCA Women in Jeopardy shelter. She developed a passion for serving others, volunteering at the Rain Recovery Center, the YWCA Family Justice Center, and the Price Center and Rock Camp SLC. Heather discovered her love for public speaking, telling her abortion story at the protest rally when Roe v. Wade was overturned. When she's not debunking rape myths, discussing the cycle of abuse, or bellowing, "I have had an abortion," she enjoys spending time with her boyfriend and their 3 dogs, reading, thrifting, buying plants, and wearing black. So then next we've got Jamie, and Jamie is a qualitative researcher with Ascent Center for Reproductive Health. In practice, this means that she spends her days gathering the stories and experiences of Utahns who receive, provide, and oversee reproductive health care in our state. Her work is grounded in the belief that everyone deserves access to high-quality, person-centered care, and her research focuses on identifying barriers individuals face in accessing that care. Over the past 3 years, the Ascent team led Family Planning Elevated, a statewide contraceptive initiative that partnered with clinics throughout Utah to provide no-cost contraception to those who wanted it. Over 18,000 Utahns received no-cost contraception through Family Planning Elevated, and the Ascent team was able to collect extensive data on the landscape of contraceptive care in Utah. Jamie will be sharing her experience as a private citizen and is not speaking on behalf of the University of Utah. Next, we have Jason Stevenson, who is the Director of Public Policy at Planned Parenthood Association of Utah and Planned Parenthood Action Council of Utah. He joined the staff in October after working at both the ACLU of Utah and the Utah Health Policy Project. Trained as a journalist, Jason served as a staff editor at both Backpacker and Outside magazines, and he began his reporting career in Washington, D.C., covering politics on Capitol Hill. And last but not least, we have Jessica Wallace, who is a resident of Rose Park and has lived in Utah for 5 years with her partner and 2 dogs. She is a nurse, having worked in the adult critical care setting for over 12 years. So thank you everyone for being on this panel. And before we actually start the panel, I'd like to invite Carrie Galloway up to say a few words. As you know, Carrie is our current CEO, whose time as our CEO is ending, and this is her last event as the current CEO. So we're gonna give her a few seconds to say some words.
Sure. I am impressed at the community turnout for this event. I'm thrilled that everyone's come. You know, Planned Parenthood cares so much about the sexual and reproductive health care of our communities. And we're there providing health care, education, advocacy every day. So as you can imagine, these previous 45 days were a stab in the heart to what we believe in is so important to make a strong community, for all of us to have bodily autonomy, to be able to make the best decisions we can for ourselves, our families, our communities. You people are the ones who stand strong and represent that and are here to build strong communities. And so for you to come tonight and lead your incredible intelligence, heartful caring about your community, as well as yourself and your family, is just so heartening for us at Planned Parenthood, who, what do they say, 24/7, every day of the week, every day of the year, care about this community's sexual and reproductive health care, and the chance to make your own decisions for your family. So I walked in here tonight and I was like, wow, they RSVP'd and they showed up. You guys are great to see you all here tonight. I ran into wonderful old friends. I see so many new friends. You know, Forrest, I see you too. You know, it's amazing. We all have to remember that our voices are strong. We are the community. We are who healthcare is for. We are the ones who make those determinations. And I thank you for coming and thinking with us to help make our community stronger, our families stronger, the state stronger, no matter what those electeds say. We have to say it even louder and stronger and with all the passion that you have. I want to just take a minute to introduce Sarah Stays. As Candy said, I'm retiring, and there's a little break before our new permanent CEO for Planned Parenthood is going to be on hand. And so I turned to one of my good friends. She's been the CEO of Planned Parenthood, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Nebraska. So you got some red states and some blue states. And she was willing to come here and bridge between me and the new CEO. So she's my hero, Sarah Stays.
You forgot to say Minnesota. That's the blue state. Thank you, Carrie. Carrie is my hero. I'm just so happy to be here with this incredible woman leader for so many years. And you all have built the most amazing organization here in Utah. I am so thrilled, so honored to be a part of it. And thank you very much for welcoming me. I really, really look forward to getting to know a whole bunch of you in the 8 weeks I'm going to be here. So thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So once again, si necesitan interpretación en español, tenemos audífonos acá. Para lo que lo necesitan, if you need interpretation into Spanish, we do have interpreters. And as I make my way over, we're actually going to start by hearing a story. Just want to say real, candidly, abortion, first of all, no one's entitled to any story. It is very much a privilege to hear anyone's story, and we are very privileged today to hear 2 abortion stories. So we're going to start with the first one from Jessica.
Hello, thank you. I'm going to stay seated if that's okay, just because this feels more like a conversation. So, yes, my name is Jessica. I have lived in Utah now for about 4 years. I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I had an abortion at 23 weeks and 6 days in November of 2021. And my partner and I had decided, we'd been married for a few years, let's go off birth control and just see what happens and start a family. We were really excited to start a family, and I became pregnant fairly quickly. We were very excited, got in to see the doctor, 12-week appointment, everything looks great, 16-week appointment, everything looks great. We finally tell family and friends at 16 weeks. I'm a nurse, so I just had in the back of my mind, well, let's just wait, something could be wrong, something could be wrong, something could be wrong. So anyway, waited till 16 weeks, and at 16 weeks found out that with blood work that the baby had a severe neural tube defect. And we were devastated. I mean, we were completely catapulted into a new world and a new language and, specialists and really invasive testing, and is it echoing a little bit?
Well, that one's having feedback, so maybe that one.
Is this better? Better? Okay. I know it's kind of but so we're getting this testing done, we're talking to experts. We're talking to experts here in Utah, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, UCSF Children's. I mean, we were just taking our time to really understand the issue and understand what our options were. And I just remember a lot of the providers kept saying, oh, you have time, you have time, you have time. But we really didn't. We had a hard stop at 24 weeks. And me being a nurse, knowing what I know about our healthcare system, is that you can't just decide on, the day before, well, now I want an abortion, and it just happens. So I just thought, okay, let's just, we're still going to all these appointments, we're still considering, maintaining the pregnancy and taking it to term if possible, but let's get everything in order, in the event that we do decide to terminate, which includes, in the state of Utah, watching a wonderful online module of this beautiful, healthy baby at various stages of gestation. And I also had to listen to the heartbeat of that baby, which was almost insulting because I had a recording of my baby's heartbeat and I listened to it every day. I didn't need to hear this arbitrary baby's heartbeat. And I also really didn't appreciate seeing a healthy baby that I would have loved to have, carried to term and parent. So, watched that, did the consent form as well, had to wait exactly 72 hours for that appointment to start. And, obviously at this point, my husband and I had decided on the termination. And really what ultimately helped us in that decision was realizing that it was a pro-life decision in the sense that this baby was suffering and he was only going to know a life of suffering. And as his mother, I knew that he was in pain. They kept telling me he can't feel pain, he can't feel pain, but I'm thinking, of course he can't feel pain. His brain is growing into the back of his neck, his spinal cord isn't fully formed at the base of his back. Of course he's in pain. He's in pain, and this is not a life to live. And it was a pro-life decision for me and for my partner and our life as a family as well, that, parenting a child with this condition, would have gravely affected our quality of life as well. So I felt very grateful that at still 23 weeks and 6 days, and I say that because at first they said, well, in the event we can't get you in, here's the name of here's our clinic we refer to in Colorado or the one in New Mexico. And I just thought, oh my God, I'm already losing my baby and now I'm gonna have to go out of state to recover, to have this procedure with doctors I don't know and recover in this hotel room or something, and luckily my husband and I have, the means that we could take time off of work, travel, stay at a hotel, but the thought of that was just absolutely gut-wrenching to think about. But I'm just very grateful for the support I had at that time and the access to a safe abortion at that time and the wonderful providers that, without judgment and with so much care, took care of both my husband and I during this really difficult time and one of, the hardest decisions we'll probably ever have to make. And after Roe v. Wade was overturned, I just thought, what would we have done? I don't know what we would have done because we didn't even find out until 17 weeks that something was wrong, and there's just not enough time. There's not enough time, and I'm just very grateful for the access that I had when I needed it, and the support I've now since have found in this community, and look forward to, again, like you mentioned, bellowing, I had an abortion, going forward to really open up the conversation of what an abortion looks like. So I'll stop there.
So thank you. Heather is also an abortion storyteller, and we will hear her story at the end. But I do have a couple of questions for both of them, and we'll just start right away with the panel. So for Heather and Jessica, if y'all, whoever wants to go first, if y'all can tell us what motivates you to share your story, and how has sharing your story impacted your life, and how you talk about abortion in your circles.
I share my story because I have never believed I have anything to be ashamed of. And I feel like the more we talk about this, 1 in 4 women have had an abortion. It shouldn't be a mystery or something that is hidden or never talked about, because that also makes healing from an abortion a lot more harder if you can never talk about it as well.
And I think for me, I grew up Catholic, and the only kind of frame of reference I had of an abortion was women who had an unplanned pregnancy. And I never had the narrative of, oh, you also need an abortion when you have an ectopic pregnancy or a chemical pregnancy or any other complication or severe defect. And so I'm just wanting to expand that conversation and make sure, when we say things like I lost the baby, a lot of times those women need a procedure to remove the pregnancy, which is an abortion and is healthcare and needs to be done safely. And I think just in that vein, talking within my circles, the Planned Parenthood campaign around Say Abortion has been really powerful, just because, instead of saying, oh, you had that DNC, it's, no, you had an abortion, and just saying that word to try to destigmatize it and understanding that it's a medical procedure that is very personal and that you decide to do with the help of medical professionals and should not be up for debate.
Thank you. So from what Jessica mentioned, last year we launched a campaign called Say Abortion, where we held abortion storytelling workshops. We had an exhibit, a production. We this year released a zine with 13 stories. And the whole idea behind Say Abortion is literally just that, getting people comfortable to say abortion and to use their stories, because our stories are our most powerful tools. And by telling our stories, we're able to shift the public narrative, because right now the narrative is very much abortion is stigmatized and it's very polarized and it's black and white, but we know that that's not true. And unfortunately, our legislation does not reflect that, which leads me to my next question, which is for Jason. Jason, can you give us a brief overview of what happened this session, specifically with HB 467, and what's going to happen on May 3rd?
You bet, Candy. Can folks hear me all right? And I'm wearing a mask not to be antisocial, sorry, but I've had a COVID negative cold for a couple days and just decided this would be the best way to participate and keep everyone safe. So I'm Jason Stevenson. I'm the policy director at Planned Parenthood. And if folks are confused about what's going to happen on May 3rd because of a certain bill called HB 467, join the big club, because it is a very confusing bill and a lot of people don't know what it will do. And we're going to try to shed a little bit of light about what this bill does. As a bit of a background, it was a bill that was introduced about the middle of the session by Representative Carrie Ann Lisenby. It's a bill that we knew was coming. We didn't quite know what was in it. And when it appeared, it went quickly through the legislature, was passed pretty much by party line votes, and was signed by the governor into law yesterday. It's HB 467, House Bill 467, with the title Abortion Changes. And it's really two bills. It's 1,000 lines of code, so it's really long. But what it has to do is it has to deal with two different realities. One is where we are right now, where abortion is available up to 18 weeks gestation without any type of requirements. Abortion is accessible, it's safe, it's available in Utah. We really like the Salt Lake Tribune headline this morning, which had that in the headline, that abortion is still available. So we want people to know that. The second situation is if the trigger ban, which was a bill passed several years ago, SB 174, Senate Bill 174, comes into effect. And so the bill is really written in parallel. The same language is in the bill twice, which is one reason why it's very confusing and why it seems a little bit repetitious, because they had to do that because they're dealing with two different scenarios. So what happens on May 3rd is which is the enactment date for the bill, 60 days after the end of the legislative session, is somewhat dependent on what happens with the trigger ban and what happens with the injunction that we currently have to block the trigger ban from going into effect. That's why we have abortion up to 18 weeks in Utah right now. If we didn't have that injunction, that court block, then abortion would not be accessible in Utah. So there's these two scenarios that could play out. One is if the injunction is still in place and abortion is available up to 18 weeks. And one is if that injunction somehow goes away or is interrupted and abortion is not accessible in Utah. The one consistent theme with this bill is, and it's a big change and it's one that's often misunderstood, is that starting May 3rd, abortions can only happen in hospitals in Utah. This is an interesting and unusual provision of this bill. There's a second part of it which says, oh, they can also happen in clinics with the same level of safety and standards for pregnant people and their unborn children as a hospital. And that was added into a substitute version of this bill. No one is quite sure what that means, because it's new, it's undefined, it's something that needs to be worked out. But we're looking at it as an operative block on May 3rd, that after May 3rd, abortions can only happen in hospitals in Utah. The interesting thing about hospitals in Utah, some of them do perform abortions, but they don't perform that many, and they tend to perform the abortions that are, the difficult, complicated issues that people face. It's not the majority of the abortions that are out there. About 3,000 abortions occur in Utah every year. Hospitals perform, it's kind of hard to get the numbers, somewhere in the 100 to 250 range out of those cases each year. So it's not a whole lot of them. So this change on May 3rd, where all of a sudden hospitals have to do all this care, is going to be probably the biggest change that's coming. Now, you might read on Twitter that people are saying, well, wait, there's clinics that can have the same safety standards as hospitals and operate that way. We're exploring that. We're looking into that. We're seeing what that means. But right now, that is a big question mark. And when we look at the bill, we see that hospitals are the only place to get abortion care after May 3rd as more of an exclamation point. So that's what we're really looking at in terms of how this will impact care. So what does that mean for Planned Parenthood health centers? We're staying open. We're still around. We're going to still provide all of the sexual and reproductive health care that you're used to, that people come and get from us. That is the vast majority of the care we provide. However, starting May 3rd, unless some things change, we might not be able to provide abortion services at our health clinics, even if they retain their current licenses beyond that. There could be some movement about new licensures, there could be some movement there, we're just not sure. The other challenge is what happens with the injunction. If the injunction is in place on May 3rd, then that means abortions are available up to 18 weeks without any questions here in Utah. So does that mean that people are going to show up at a hospital emergency room and say, hey, I would like to have a first trimester abortion. Can you help me? That's going to be pretty confusing for hospitals in terms of what they do. They're not used to dealing with that type of a situation. Now there's a couple, it's 50, 45 days between now and May 3rd. Some things could be worked out, but it's definitely going to create what we would call confusion. It's going to create anxiety, and it's going to create a lack of access for this care. And that is something that we can definitely foresee. Now there could be some solutions worked out between now and then. There could be some breakthroughs, but we definitely see a lot of confusion, a lot of lack of access, and a lot of patients not really knowing where to go get this care on May 3rd, where up until this point, the health clinics and health centers operated by Planned Parenthood have been available, have been known about, and have a very, very good track record of providing this care. So that is the gist of what's going to happen on May 3rd. There's a lot of other provisions within this law that will also take effect, including additional penalties on providers that break the law. There's a couple of new kind of extra educational things that providers have to tell their patients who are having abortion care. And there's also some new limits that could affect those that are survivors of rape or incest, limiting their care to a certain gestational age. Now, those are things that are somewhat also conditional on whether or not the injunction is in place when this law goes into effect. It's complex. It's a very difficult law to understand. We've spent weeks going through it line by line. We're still learning new things. And it's definitely going to, if someone says they know exactly what's going to happen on May 3rd, don't believe them, because we really don't. We're still figuring this out. And the one thing we'll say is that Planned Parenthood will stay open, we'll keep fighting, and we're going to provide all the care that we are legally allowed to provide.
So with that, I just wanted to move on to the next question. We have limited time, so I wish I could ask you more questions right now, Jason, but we might just save it for the Q&A. But for the past 3 years, extensive polling and research has been done in Utah to see how Utahns actually feel about abortion access. And it's been pretty much telling us that Utahns, for the majority, believe in access to abortion. And the most recent polling was done by the Ascent Center a few months ago, just in December. And Jamie, if you can you just describe a little bit what the polling is that your team conducted, and what are some of the key outcomes and takeaways from this polling, especially as it relates to how Utahns feel about abortion?
Hello. Okay, now it's working. Yes, thank you. You summarized the polling quite well. I think it's really important during the legislative session, we hear our elected officials kind of speaking on behalf of Utahns, but as researchers up at the University of Utah, we really wanted to look at the actual data and see what Utahns actually feel about access to abortion. So we partnered with a data management company, a nonpartisan data management company called Cicero, and we surveyed 1,200 Utahns. So about half of the surveys were online, the other half were via phone. We had a 59-question survey and asked them about all sorts of aspects of reproductive health in Utah. But today I just want to focus on what we asked around abortion access. So one of the questions that we asked was, what level of government, in your opinion, should determine laws regarding abortion? And 52% of our respondents said that there should be no government involvement and that decisions about whether to have an abortion should be left up to the patient and their provider. And that held pretty consistently across all demographics, including a political affiliation. Less than a quarter, so 24% of respondents said that the state should determine the laws regarding abortion. And then the remaining 15% of people said that the federal government should determine the laws, and 10% had no opinion. The next question we asked was, if the government is involved, what should those laws be? And here you really see a lot of the gray area about how folks feel about abortion laws. And so the majority, 61% of Utahns, believe that abortion should be legal to some degree. And then there's a further breakdown within that. So of that 61%, 23% of Utahns that we polled said abortion should be legal in all cases. 19% believe abortion should be legal up to the viability of the fetus, which is the standard in Roe versus Wade. Then another 19% believed it should be legal up to an earlier gestation with broad exceptions for maternal and fetal health or rape and incest. And then so that was the 61% that believe it should be legal in all or most cases. The remaining percent, so 26% of Utahns, believe that abortion should be illegal, except in specific cases of the exceptions for the life of the pregnant person or reported rape. And then only 5% of Utahns believe abortion should be illegal in all cases. And then a few other findings from our survey that are of interest is, when we asked about exemptions to laws restricting abortion, 2/3 agreed or strongly agreed that both maternal physical and mental health exemptions are important in abortion policy. And interestingly, as I mentioned, many of these findings hold true across the political spectrum. So for example, 61% of all respondents felt a statewide abortion ban would interfere with personal decision-making. And then if we narrow that just to the conservatives that we polled, 49% of conservatives feel that a statewide ban interferes with personal decision-making. And similarly, 74% of our respondents agreed contraceptive access should be expanded in states that impose abortion restrictions, and that includes 65% of those identifying as conservative. So when you look at our findings, it really highlights the differences between what most Utahns want and believe and what the actual abortion restrictions in our state look like. Local data, provider expertise, and most importantly, the communities that are most impacted really highlight the importance of ensuring that individuals have access to all reproductive health care services, including abortion care.
Thank you, Jamie. majority support abortion access, yet that's not being reflected in our legislation. Instead, they are passing legislation that is impacting individuals and families' ability to make decisions that are best for them. We're seeing this not just with abortion, but across the board. This year we saw it with trans and LGBTQ healthcare, with youth care. We saw it with attacks on DEI in schools. All of these attacks are affecting people's ability to live life in a safe environment. At Planned Parenthood, we do use the reproductive justice framework to guide us in our work, because the fight for abortion access and all reproductive health care is an intersectional one. And when we talk about abortion, we have to talk about all of these other attacks that are affecting the autonomy of individuals and families, because they're all connected. If you're not familiar with reproductive justice, it is a framework that was created by Black women in 1994 that looks past just the rights. It's looking at having the ability to decide if you want children, if you don't, when you do, and how you do, and also to be able to parent the children that you already have or are bringing into this world in safe and sustainable communities. So it's looking at the cross sections of all of your identities and addressing any oppression that may exist in your ability to access reproductive freedom. With that, I did want to move on to asking Ashley a question about basically that, about the intersections and why it's important to fight for abortion access, as well as other movements and how they intersect and how these attacks are going to negatively impact people with marginalized identities.
Thank you. And thank you for explaining the RJ framework for the room. So when I was first reading that question in preparation for the panel, I had like an answer, and now something else is coming up for me. I think that, okay, sorry, I'm trying to like get all my thoughts, but my thoughts are that, so currently we are living in a state and a country, right, which is trying to force its oppression on all of us, right, and our bodies, and take away our autonomy. We know that there have been specific demographics throughout the inception of this country whose autonomy has always been threatened. Specifically BIPOC women and BIPOC queer folks, right? One thing that comes up for me in this conversation, especially when we want to highlight the reproductive justice framework, is that the audacity of a government, or the powers that be, to force its hand and say that people have to have children, right? Yet does absolutely nothing to make sure that any of those children thrive, but especially the most vulnerable, marginalized, oppressed, violated, abused, and murdered demographics, right? So that's what comes up for me when we have this conversation, and that's why it's important that people, places, and things with the most access continue this fight, right? Because for the longest, right, it has been QTPOC, acronym for queer, trans, people of color, BIPOC, people who have been at the forefront of these movements. And interestingly, we are also the most policed people in these United States, right? And especially in Utah. When we talk about reproductive justice, when we talk about reproductive rights, abortion rights, and abortion access, I really want to zoom out the conversation so that we can all understand and start on the same page and know that Roe versus Wade, yes, a blessing in these lands, but Roe versus Wade has not always extended to all of us, right? So what we're looking at now is just the conversation that's been happening in the living rooms and kitchens of, like our Black women, our queer friends, our Latinx people, now it's zooming out the scope, and white women and straight people are starting to feel the impacts of what it really means to have your autonomy stripped away. And so what I want to say, I guess to answer the question, I don't know if I'm answering it. Like I said, something else came up for me in this moment. But what my hope is that in these movements, in this coalition work, that we really, really understand what it means to be in solidarity with each other, right? What it means to bring each other to the table, which means bringing the most affected, policed, marginalized, abused people to the table for these conversations. We need Planned Parenthood to keep hiring the candidas, right? To keep putting these voices on the mics. Because once, I forgot who said, is it Mother Audre Lorde who said, we ain't free to, what is it? None of us are free till all of us are free, right? So specifically, when Black women and BIPOC people and QDPOC people are free, all of us will be free. So that's all I don't know. That was kind of all over the place, but that's what I wanted to highlight.
That was beautiful. Thank you. It reminded me of another Audre Lorde quote where she said, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. And that's so important as we fight for abortion access to keep in mind, because we should also be fighting for queer justice. We should be fighting for disability justice, for migrant justice, for justice for people with low incomes, people who are always, not for some reason, it's very intentional, left behind. So we should always be keeping this in mind as we talk about abortion access. So I have a few questions now that are open to anyone to answer. The first one being, which is a feeling that I feel a lot of folks have, which is why we're going to ask the question, why should we still bother to fight for abortion access, and why are you still fighting?
I'm still fighting because I was able to have an abortion, and I want anyone else who would like to have an abortion to also have an abortion.
I'm still fighting because even as, and I recognize this, a white woman of privilege, it was still very difficult for me to get an abortion. And I can't imagine having not had the health literacy and, the resources that we had to get that abortion. And that's why I'm fighting, because I want to make sure that everyone would have access to that should they need it.
Okay. I still fight because there's no other way to be a Black woman on this land, in this country. I fight for Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy, and for my own mother who had an unconsented hysterectomy. So,
Awesome. So the next question, and again, this is open to anyone to answer, and we're going to skip the second one, so we're going to just go through the third one because of time. So what gives you hope at this moment? I feel like we're all pretty low in hope, but one of our goals with tonight's event is to help us reimagine or envision a future that is hopeful, that has abortion access. So what is one thing that's helping you continue to have hope in this moment?
I have a few things that are giving me hope. The first is just the type of data that I was sharing, that our elected officials really aren't representing the electorate, and I do have hope that we'll do a better job of electing people who actually represent what Americans think. The second thing that gives me hope is I wish everyone in this room could join me and see the group of people that I get to work with every day, the medical providers and researchers who have really committed their lives to ensuring that the women that they care for receive care that is respectful, that is dignified, that respects their autonomy. And so my team gives me so much hope. One of the providers I work with says every patient he sees, he starts the visit by saying, I want you to leave here today feeling really respected, and I'm gonna do whatever I need to do to make sure that happens. And then the third thing that gives me hope is my teenagers who joined this conversation today, and they're incredible friends. I have a lot of faith in Gen Z that they're not gonna sit idly by while their rights are stripped away. And I don't think I would want to be on the wrong side of Gen Z. They're not messing around in their advocacy. And I'm so grateful for my daughters and their big dreams and their big ideas and their fearlessness. So that gives me a lot of hope.
I think moments like this give me a lot of hope. The fact that we filled a room talking about abortion access and reproductive justice. My community gives me a lot of hope. Also the tradition that I know that it's like we've always taken care of each other. And you know, we know how to keep each other safe ultimately. So, yeah.
This is a difficult question. This room gives me hope, and all of your faces in this conversation gives me hope.
Just quickly want to echo that what gives me hope are the providers and conversations I've had with them, and how, you know, it's not often that OBGYNs have to get into the advocacy role, but it seems like they're very passionate about it. And even I was able to attend it's called the Stillbirth Alliance conference. It was held at the U this year, and it's really around pregnancy and infant loss and abortion. And just the conversations there and the networking that was going on, and offers from providers in other states to have, you know, say you're a physician here in Utah, and now maybe as a resident you're not going to get trained in how to remove a pregnancy at any stage gestation. This one provider said, send your residents to us, we will gladly accept them and teach them so that we will still maintain a workforce that can provide safe abortions.
You know, one thing that gives me hope is history, because we might not have been in the room a long time ago when people faced similar issues, but people like us were in the room decades ago, hundreds of years ago, dealing with issues that affected their lives and their friends and their communities. And they stood up and they made a change. And here we filled a room with people who are here today to do it. And I think what also gives me hope is that sometimes you have to lose something to know how much you valued it. And I know that's hard, but I'm thinking we're in this room because we value something, but there's many other people who aren't in this room who might learn to value it once they see what can happen and once that becomes apparent. So I'm hoping that this room can get bigger even as we hit a little bit of a bottom and then start climbing back up.
Awesome. And then our last question, which everyone will be answering, is if anything, I mean, y'all did it for the last one, so. So if anything and everything were possible, what does abortion access look like to you in the future, whether that's near or far?
I can start quick. It was interesting, during the legislative session, it was after one of the hearings, I was talking to a representative from Pro-Life Utah. I introduced myself, I'm new at the job, so I wanted to say hello. And she was like, oh, I hope you're out of a job soon. You know, and I was like, oh, well, that's a nice way to talk to someone. But actually, I actually hope to be out of a job. If we do our job to the extent that we can get to a point where no longer do someone like me who works in the policy and legal field have to fight tooth and nail to get incremental change here and there, that we can achieve something where it's self-sustaining, where we have elected officials that are promoting this and doing it on their own and don't need to be pushed constantly or stopped from doing things. So I actually hope one day, soon, I'll be out of a job, because we can move forward to an extent that this is a self-sustaining rights state that protects and respects the rights of all people.
My hope is that this discussion only occurs between the person with the uterus seeking an abortion and their medical provider. And it doesn't need to happen anywhere else or have any other outside influence. It's a private decision between a person and their provider.
My hope is for actually accessible and affordable abortion. It's not always actually affordable. And I would love for people who can bear children to be treated like adults and to be trusted to make their own decisions without, questions, classes, ultrasounds, and heartbeats.
Yeah, all of that. My hope is that Uncle Tom gets his Uncle Sam, sorry, wrong uncle. Okay, Uncle Sam. You don't want to know. Uncle Sam gets his fingers up out of my uterus.
Yeah, I think if we get to dream big, I dream of all forms of healthcare being accessible to folks, because even before this most recent law, healthcare was not accessible to many Americans, and abortion is a form of healthcare. So I dream of individuals being able to actually access abortion care within their communities, of being able to go to the pharmacies and picking up medication for their abortions, of doctors providing it around the state so that we don't have these harrowing, horrifying stories of individuals having to travel far immediately after having what can be a painful procedure. And since we're dreaming big, to the point of reproductive justice, I dream of options throughout women's reproductive lifespans, right? Access to contraceptive options, maybe some better contraceptive options for people who don't like the ones that we have, and ethical adoption practices for folks who decide they want to carry a pregnancy but don't want to parent. I dream of better parenting resources, and as Ashley mentioned, systems that actually support families and the kids that are already here and the kids that are yet to be here.
Beautiful, thank you. So before we move on to the Q&A, Heather will share her story.
It was 2014. I had just turned 34 years old, and I was married. My husband and I had just moved to Crown Heights, Brooklyn. We had used our entire savings to move to New York. We had been there for 3 weeks when I found out I was pregnant. I had a lot of very sound and sensible reasons to terminate my pregnancy. I had no job, we had no health insurance, and we were paying $1,900 a month for a 1-bedroom, 4th floor walk-up. But more than anything, I terminated my pregnancy because I did not want to bring a child into my marriage. I was fortunate enough to be in a state where there was, and still is, accessible and affordable abortion. Within a matter of days, I made an appointment and was at the Women's Health Clinic in Brooklyn. I was early enough in my pregnancy that I was able to take the pill. I didn't have a waiting period. I didn't have to take a class. And I wasn't forced to listen to my baby's heartbeat, though I would have, because I knew what I was doing. I asked my husband to stay with me the following day. If you're not familiar with the abortion pill, you cramp and you bleed, and it's very painful. He told me no, that he needed to go to work. At that very moment, I knew that I had made the right choice. 6 months after having my abortion, I left that man, I left that marriage, and with much sadness, I left New York. I miss it. Having an abortion was the easiest and hardest decision I have ever made, and I have never regretted having an abortion. I always wanted children, yet there were always very sound and sensible reasons why I didn't. I have never been financially stable. My relationships have been historically abusive, and the world, woof. I think about that child every day. That child would have turned 7 last May. It's not a choice that we think, that we make, that we never think about. I have never been hesitant talking about my abortion because I do not think I did anything that I should be ashamed of. 1 in 4 women have had an abortion, so I know I'm not alone. 1, 2, 3, 4. My name is Heather Dinsmore. I have had an abortion. Thank you.
If we can do just one more round of applause for all of our panelists. Q&A, I just need to plug that we do have an abortion. Well, it's not just abortion, but if you are a supporter of abortion and believe in abortion access, we will be having a virtual storytelling and messaging workshop on April 13th, which is a Thursday from 6:30 to 8 p.m. I encourage you all to join us so that you can learn more about how to talk about abortion and how to compose your story so that you can then also share your story to change the public narrative on abortion access. With that, we are going to move on to the Q&A, which we have about 6 minutes, only because we want to have the community conversation afterwards. So if anyone has, we'll take 3 questions. You have a question?
I have a point.
Okay, we're going to run the mic over to you.
And I'm not trying to be rude or anything, but my name is Angela Romero. This is my district. I serve in House District 25. And I just want to remind everyone that not every elected official is against abortion. And sometimes we focus on the people that are opposed to abortion or who don't support abortion. And we forget about the people like myself who are working our asses off every day at that Capitol to be your voice. So I don't want to take away from people's stories because the stories are just as important. But I do want to highlight someone like Senator Jennifer Plum, Senator Luz Escamilla, Representative Brian King, who fought those bills tooth and nail because they were before your committee. And so I just want people to remember that there are some of us up there that are people of color, we're BIPOC too, and we're working our asses off every day. And so I don't want us to lose sight of that. And if you really care, and I know everyone cares here, just remember who we are and help us when we're running for re-election or other people like that. Because that's the only way we're going to change the narrative up there. We can talk about gerrymandering and all that stuff. And I'm not trying to take away from stories here, but it gets frustrating for some of us sometimes when we come in these rooms and all we talk about is certain elected officials and not talking about the people fighting every day for our rights. So thank you.
Any other, we can take 2 more questions. There's one over here, Iman.
Hi, I'm Patrice Corneli, and I'm 71, and I was a teenager in the 60s, and I remember the 50s, and I certainly remember Roe v. Wade. I also had a little sister who had an abortion when she was 14 before Roe v. Wade. That was a really, really, really bad time. We don't want to go through that again. There were so many, well, there wasn't, unless you were lucky enough to have parents like I did who had a doctor that was very good and would illegally do an abortion for my sister. You were kind of out of luck. And it's terrible to be in that state again. And I just want you to know that that's why so many of us who were so relieved when Roe v. Wade happened and never anticipated that it would be overturned. You just gotta continue fighting like we did back then. I, like Heather, had an abortion. I just had it because I had 2 children and I right away got pregnant again. And I had a career and I loved my 2 girls who are now nearly 40 and have their own little girls. And it remains vitally important that those women continue to, and all of you continue to be protected health-wise. That's
If y'all are quick, we can do both of those last questions.
This is a question for the policy director. I'm curious if the new bill addresses insurance coverage at all?
It does not directly address insurance coverage. That did come up during the discussion, because one of the challenges with the trigger ban is that the exceptions include a fetal abnormality that has been diagnosed by 2 MFMs, or maternal fetal medicine doctors. Many Utah insurance companies do not cover abortions for that type of exception. It's very hard to get abortion coverage in Utah for any kind of insurance coverage. So there's a big gap there. Sponsors of the bill said, oh, we're going to take care of that, but we're still waiting. I think it's one of the, what we would call sort of gaps or collateral damage or other issues that this bill creates that a lot of people just don't know yet. But yes, insurance coverage was not affected. Those gaps still remain.
Okay, and then our last question.
Hey, I'm Helen, and I'm here with a question, excuse me, from reproductive health providers from People's Health Clinic, which is up in Park City and provides free medical care to anybody who doesn't have insurance in Wasatch or Summit counties. And we do provide not abortions, but all the other reproductive services and referrals to abortion, and as well as emergency contraception. I guess the question that they had is, they really wanted to know, please find out what is changing. What do we tell our patients? And I think, Jason, I mean, question for you. I mean, obviously I heard there's a lot of confusion that, theoretically, if the injunction doesn't go forward, there's, you could go to a hospital, but I mean, our folks obviously are, mostly Latinx, many undocumented, that's not really an option. So I just want to throw that out there. And also I just really want to thank every single person on the panel. You all were really, really, each one of you said something that was just really so powerful and so moving. So thank you.
I can quickly address that. The confusion is going to be paramount between now and May 3rd and probably even after May 3rd. The hospital requirement is the thing that is definitely the big stick. We don't know quite what that means. So that hospitals also in Utah and providers can refuse to provide abortion care. So just because it says go to a hospital doesn't mean that hospital is going to be able to care for you. And in fact, where do you go? Do you go to the emergency room? Do you go to the maternity floor? There's really no explanation there. And a lot of people who come to Planned Parenthood for our services do not have a primary care doctor, do not get referrals. They come to us. That's where they get their care. So the idea of walking into a giant hospital and not knowing where to go is going to be really intimidating, and that's why we say that this is a functional ban on abortion access in Utah, because it creates so much uncertainty, lack of access, and lack of knowledge.
Awesome, thank you. So next we're going to have a community conversation about this, and so that everyone can have an opportunity to speak, we are going to do small breakout circles. So what we're going to do is by every 2 or 3 rows, you're going to turn into a little circle, and we're going to have a facilitator come in and ask questions to guide the conversation so that we can together come up with solutions or ideas of how we can work as a community to address the issue with abortion access that we're having in Utah. So if you are staying